Hello and welcome back to another update where I cover the latest developments in the Iranian-Israeli war. And yes, it is a war because both Israel and Iran have called it that. What is happening is an all-out war between Iran and Israel, although the distance between the two countries is approximately 1500 kilometers, which makes it difficult for any sort of ground invasion. What we're seeing is an all-out war in terms of missile strikes and airstrikes. The Israelis are mainly fighting this war through airstrikes on Iranian territory. What they do is that they fly over Syrian territory into Iraqi territory and launch air-launched missiles on Iranian targets. These targets are radar sites, air defense units, air bases, airports, missile launchers, and nuclear facilities, as well as a singular oil storage which took place in the south of Iran. In turn, the Iranians started their first response last night, where they struck Haifa, Tel Aviv, and several military sites, where the range of how many rockets they launched is somewhere between 100 and 150, where the Israelis claim that the Iranians were planning on launching 1,000 missiles. However, once the Iranian missile strikes began, they launched operations to strike Iranian missile launches. This forced the Iranians to spread out their missile strikes to 4 separate strikes. One took place late evening local time yesterday night, then an additional one at about 3 a.m. local time, an additional one at 7 a.m. local time. The first strike consisted of 2 waves, and the third strike was a single wave, and the fourth strike was a single wave. This adds up to 4 waves. These strikes were mainly targeted at military sites, but there were some strikes in Tel Aviv, such as this one, where we see the still image of a missile exploding. Both waves on Tel Aviv both had missiles striking on camera based on the Associated Press skyline view of Tel Aviv. The first wave saw 2 explosions and the second wave saw a single explosion, from which mainly skyscrapers were struck. We also see this footage here of an Israeli neighborhood which saw either debris or a missile striking the area. On top of that, the Iranians have warned the United States that if they support Israel in strikes on Iranian territory, then US bases will be targets. Here we see a map over US bases in the region. We see several in Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, UAE, Oman, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and a single one in Syria. These are all potential targets for Iranian missile strikes. The Iranians have missiles with thousands of kilometers of range, so all of these are within range of Iranian missiles, where the Iranians, according to the Israelis, have 2,000 ballistic missiles ready to launch, and within 2 years they will have 8,000, which means they expect an annual production of 3,000. However, according to some sources, the Iranians have already had a very high production rate for the past few years, which means that the estimates of how many ballistic missiles the Iranians have can be significantly higher than what the Israelis estimate. However, there's no clear information because this is clearly classified information, and the Israelis' information and estimate is likely based on their Mossad secret services trying to gain information on the Iranian side. In either case, the Iranians do have thousands of ballistic missiles. They have so far launched between 100 to 150 according to the estimates, and the estimates of how many struck Israel ranged from 10 to 40. It is unclear exactly how many. Therefore, the hit rate ranges widely at 7% with 150 missiles launched and 10 struck. The Iranians with 2,000 missiles would be able to strike 140 areas, and with the 40% at 100 missiles, that would be 40%. With 2,000 missiles, that would be 800 strikes. And for every additional 1,000 missiles the Iranians have, that would be an additional 400 strikes. The majority of these missiles have about 1,000 kilograms, 1 ton warheads, which means that they can do significant damage. Some have very low accuracy with a 50 to 100 meters circular estimated arrival, where some high-tech ones, which are hypersonic and accurate, is somewhere between 5 and 10 meters. The Israelis, however, do have a lot of electronic warfare, which can affect how these missiles land. The Israelis claim that the Iranians are using the footage from videos posted online about Iranian strikes on Israeli territory to navigate through this electronic warfare and adjust the hits. This is why they prohibited the filming of these strikes, except for international media like the Associated Press, which filmed the strikes in Tel Aviv, which, according to the footage by the Associated Press and the live stream during the Iranian strikes, the successful hit rate of Iranian missiles was somewhere around 10%. However, it is not clear how the Iranians are choosing which missiles strike where. The Iranians can choose to launch a lot of weaker, older, and less accurate missiles on population centers like Tel Aviv and Haifa, where the objective simply is to overwhelm the Israeli air defense, while the accurate and faster missiles that can bypass the Israeli air defense are targeting military sites where they plan on striking important targets. In these military sites, there's absolutely no footage of either the strikes themselves or the aftermath yet. We'll have to wait some days for satellite imagery to confirm or deny any strikes in other areas. By then, we can count how many strikes actually hit. The Israelis are not slowing down with their strikes. They are facing a lot more difficulties today compared to yesterday due to the activation of the Iranian air defense. It was reported that the Israelis found a lot of success early on during their campaign due to the surprise factor, but also due to a cyber attack they launched on Iran, which completely disrupted radar systems and air defense systems within Iran, on top of their spiderweb similar operation where they had Mossad agents within Iran launch smaller drones on Iranian air defense systems during the initial attack. So during the initial attack, the Israelis practically had full air supremacy. However, at about noon on the first day, the Iranians activated their air defense. They stabilized the situation. Despite the 20 generals assassinated on the first day, they managed to reorganize with new generals appointed, and from then on the fighting had become a lot more even. There is no accurate footage, confirmed footage of Iranians striking down Israeli jets despite their claims to do so. However, there's also no evidence that Israeli jets have even entered Iranian airspace yet. There's been footage of drones that were then shot down by Iranian air defense. There's also footage of Iranian air defense attacking Israeli missiles as they attempted to strike several cities within Iran and military targets there as well. Based on this, we can see that the Iranians managed to stabilize and reorganize the situation, and they managed to strike back at Israel, evening out the battlefield between the two sides. Which brings us to a quote from an Israeli official on Israeli Channel 13. The operation's objectives are to strike the nuclear program and surface-to-surface missiles, and do not include targeting the regime. However, they also believe that they cannot fully destroy Iran's nuclear infrastructure. It's clear this will end in a deal. They also stated that the initial plan was a shock and awe objective, where the Israeli planned and estimated that with initial success, a lot of strikes, including on nuclear facilities, hitting the Iranian air defense capabilities and the assassination of the 20 or so generals that were assassinated on the first day, the first hours, would cause a panic within the Iranian leadership, and that they would run to make a deal with the United States and avoid further conflict with Israel. Instead, what we saw is that the Iranians did not just not give up, they actually struck back and stabilized the situation. Now it's a lot more back and forth and even battlefield. The Israelis still have the initiative. However, the Iranians are fighting back, and that is something that the Israelis did not expect. And as mentioned earlier, they want a deal. They don't want to fight until the end, because this would be a very costly war, especially if the Iranians launch all of their ballistic missiles on Israel. In terms of destroying all Iranian nuclear facilities, some are harder to destroy than others. An example is the Fordow nuclear facility, which is deeply underground. According to this Axios article, Israel does not believe that they can destroy this facility. They believe that the only way to destroy this is through the direct help from the United States. However, the United States has so far refused to get involved in any offensive operation against Iran. They've helped Israeli a lot defensive operations to avoid the ballistic missiles from striking Israel's territory with THAAD systems and their own jets. However, they have not participated in any of the offensive operations so far. That is not to mention that they have not met with any success. The Israelis struck the Mehrabad airfield, where they managed to strike multiple planes. They also managed to strike several missile launchers and air defense systems with a lot of varieties of weapons, mostly within Iranian territory, and drones on the border area. They also managed to attack the Natanz nuclear facility, where they managed to strike 3 separate buildings, including a storage area. They also managed to strike the oil storage in the southern coast, in the area of Bushehr. Based on this, we can see that the Israelis have faced a lot of success. The majority of the successful strikes happened in the first 12 hours, and since then mostly on the western outskirts of Iran and not much deeper into the country. Despite this, Israel claims that they're launching an operation with 70 jets to establish air supremacy from the western border all the way to Tehran, to have Israeli planes operating above the city. However, this is a very difficult journey, because the Iranians have thousands of air defense batteries, mostly domestically made. They have a lot of air defense. However, they also managed to attack this radar site within Iran. So the Israelis are attempting to disable the radars and then strike the anti-air launchers to establish this air supremacy zone. However, they still have at least about 1,400 batteries to go. Compared to Ukraine, they had a similar number, about 1,500 at the start of the war. At this point, they probably have closer to 100 after 3 years of fighting. And this is fighting Russia's full strength. And Russia has a significantly larger and more capable cruise and ballistic missile offensive capabilities compared to Israel, even with US help, in terms of supplies without direct participation. So based on this, we can see that this war, if it continues without a deal, can continue for years without getting any results, as the Iranians will be able to produce 3,000 or so ballistic missiles a year. That means about 10 ballistic missiles every single day, while the Israelis will be able to receive a lot of support from the United States. But unless the United States gets directly involved, then they will not gain an overwhelming advantage against Iran without very tough battles ahead to fight against the Iranian air defense, which is mostly taking place with the use of missiles from outside Iranian territory, and there's a limit to how many missiles they have, while the Iranians have a significantly larger amount of air defense missiles and systems. And we're going to end it off here for today. The full-out, all-out war between Iran and Israel continues here on the second day with no clear outcome. While the Israelis were the clear winners of the first day, the Iranians have made a significant comeback and have come much closer to evening the battlefield between the two sides here on the second day, and we'll continue to see significant strikes on both sides overnight and in the coming days. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you all for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, check out my Patreon and YouTube membership for additional content. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.